She was standing on my front porch when I got home from work, clipboard in hand, smug smile locked and loaded like a weapon. I thought maybe she was lost. Or drunk. Or possibly both. But no, Karen wasn't confused. She was exactly where she wanted to be. "This porch," she said, gesturing around like a real estate agent showing a house she didn't own, "is in violation of HOA aesthetics. You'll be receiving a fine." I stared at her, still holding my lunch container from the office, and trying to figure out what kind of grown adult wakes up and decides to cosplay as a dictator. "It's a porch," I said. "A small one. With a chair. For sitting." She made a note. "Unapproved modification. Per Article 4, Section 2B of the Oak Ridge HOA Guidelines, all front-facing structural changes must be pre-approved." Then she looked up and smiled wider. "Did you even read your covenant?" I wanted to say I'd rather floss with barbed wire than memorize HOA bylaws, but I also didn't want to give her the satisfaction. Instead, I nodded and said, "Oh yes." Right after I finished reading the Geneva Conventions. This wasn't our first rodeo, but it was our most ridiculous. I'd lived in Oak Ridge Estates for about 6 months, just long enough to realize that our HOA board was less about community improvement and more about suburban control freak therapy. Karen, the president, ran it like a tiny regime. She handed out violation slips like Halloween candy and cited landscaping height violations like she was prepping for war. But fining me for my front porch? That was new. Especially since the porch had been there when I bought the house. Same exact planks. Same exact layout. Same exact chair. I even had the inspection photos to prove it. I told her this. She didn't care. "The previous owner did not apply for retroactive approval," she said. "Therefore, you're responsible for correcting the violation. You'll need to submit plans for demolition within 30 days or we'll escalate." She pivoted like she'd just sentenced someone to public stoning and strutted off down my driveway. I watched her go, trying to remember what I'd done in a past life to deserve this real-life Saturday Night Live sketch. That night, I pulled out my folder of closing documents and started digging. And by digging, I mean I got so deep into records, inspection forms, county tax maps, and permits that I practically became one with the bureaucracy. Turns out Karen was technically right. The porch wasn't registered as part of the original home design. But here's where it got interesting. The original plans had included it. The builder had submitted an updated layout with the porch, and it was approved by the county, but never properly filed with the HOA. In other words, the HOA's own records were outdated. I made copies, highlighted sections, tabbed pages like I was preparing for a murder trial. Then I sent everything to the board with a respectful email. "Hi Karen, please find attached documentation proving the porch was included in the county-approved plans. I assume this resolves the matter. Best me." No response. 4 days. Then came a hand-delivered envelope, another violation notice. This time, the fine was doubled due to noncompliance. So I appealed. Attended the next HOA board meeting, which felt like walking into a mock trial run by toddlers who'd all read half a law book. Karen stood at the podium, theatrically holding up a color photo of my porch like it was evidence of war crimes. "This porch," she announced, "was constructed without approval, and worse, he's refused to comply." I presented my documents, calm and cordial, walking them through timelines and permit approvals like I was talking to actual adult. The other board members looked a little uncomfortable. Karen doubled down. "Those records are irrelevant. We go by our documents, and our documents don't show a porch." The board voted 3-2 against me, and that's when I stopped playing defense. You know how some people take losing a battle as a cue to move on? I'm not wired like that. I'm more of a fine, but I'm buying the battlefield kind of guy. So I went home, poured a drink, and started researching Karen's house. I didn't plan to buy it, yet, but I wanted to understand what she valued. Power. Status. Control. She treated her position on the HOA like it was a throne. She acted like the whole neighborhood was beneath her, except for her actual house, which sat atop a small hill, landscaped with obsessive precision and visible from nearly every other yard. That's when it hit me. If she thought her power came from that hill, I'd make sure she saw it crumble from the bottom up. I started quietly asking around, contractors, real estate agents, a few well-connected folks in the neighborhood. I learned 2 things. 1. Karen's mortgage was not entirely in her name. Her ex-husband had kept partial financial stake during their divorce, including shared deed right. 2. He hated her. He lived across the country now, remarried, and had apparently been looking for a way to cut ties to the house permanently. We talked. He laughed when I told him who I was. Then he said he'd sell me his stake at a loss just for the joy of watching her squirm. I bought it, quietly, legally. Then I waited. She didn't find out until a few weeks later, when she received a formal notice of property ownership adjustment from the county. The next day she was at my door, red-faced and shaking with the same clipboard from our first encounter, like it was some kind of magical totem. "You can't do this," she hissed. "You bought my house?" "Technically, I bought half your house," I said. "But I'm working on the rest." She sputtered something about legal action and slammed her clipboard against my doorframe. "This is harassment. You're trying to intimidate me." "No," I said. "That's what you do. I'm just exercising my rights as a co-owner. You know, like you said in the HOA meeting? We go by our documents." She filed a restraining order. It was denied. She filed a cease and desist. My lawyer laughed. The neighborhood began to buzz. Some people thought I'd gone too far. Others baked me cookies. But I wasn't done. Not even close. Because while Karen thought the worst thing that could happen was someone owning part of her home, she hadn't considered what that someone might do with it next. Karen changed her locks 3 times in a week. I know because I received copies of the invoices. Legally, as a co-owner of the property, I was entitled to them. She also put up security cameras, motion-activated lights, and a handwritten sign taped to her window that read, "Trespassers will be prosecuted," which, in her handwriting, looked more like a threat from a Victorian ghost than a legal warning. It would have been hilarious if she hadn't been so dead serious. She even had the nerve to file a complaint to the HOA about me, demanding I be fined for emotional terrorism. Her words, not mine. The board declined. For once, they weren't quite sure which side of this mess they wanted to be on. Karen had been queen for too long. Now, there was blood in the water. She tried to rally the other board members to her side, but the problem was, they all lived under her thumb too. I think they were secretly thrilled someone had stepped up and shoved her off the pedestal. One even emailed me anonymously, an actual board member, saying, "If you ever need a witness to her threatening behavior, let me know." It was starting to crack, the whole facade of authority she'd built. And I wasn't just cracking it. I was pulling bricks out one by one. Within a few days of becoming co-owner, I filed a formal partition action, a legal motion requesting the sale of the property due to irreconcilable differences between owners. Karen, predictably, fought it tooth and nail, arguing that I had no right to disrupt her residence. My attorney laid out every precedent like dominoes falling into place. We weren't asking her to leave. We were asking the court to order the sale of the home so each party could be compensated fairly. She screamed in the hallway after the first hearing, swearing at me in front of the clerk. I didn't even look at her. Just straightened my tie and said, "You know, Karen, you'd probably get a better appraisal if you fixed the crack in the retaining wall out front." She lunged. The bailiff stepped between us. While all this unfolded, I didn't neglect the original issue. The porch. I took it upon myself to file a counter-motion with the HOA board, submitting a comprehensive binder of county permits, structural evaluations, and even aerial drone photos showing that dozens of homes in the community had unregistered architectural features. Karen had opened the Pandora's box of technical violations, and I made sure she felt the gust of every document swirling out. The board scheduled a review. Then they postponed it. Then, mysteriously, 2 board members stepped down. One cited stress. Another cited hostility. Both were replaced by members who were a little more, let's say, reform-minded. Karen's power was eroding fast, but she still had one last lever to pull: public image. She hosted a block party, her first in years. She brought in catered food, a live jazz trio, even a bounce house. I showed up too, of course. I wasn't going to miss the HOA president's desperate grasp at relevance. I brought beer. Lots of it. Cold, local, and free. I passed it out like I was running for mayor. People came over in waves, asking questions, telling me stories about Karen's past fines, rants, and threat. Apparently she once called animal control on a teenager's puppy because it barked during her Zoom yoga class. By the end of the party, there were more people sitting in my folding chairs than hers. The jazz trio played until dark. Karen stood at her patio table, holding a clipboard that no one wanted to sign. 2 weeks later, the court ruled in my favor. The house had to be sold within 90 days. The judge was almost apologetic when he read the order aloud, but I gave a polite nod and walked out without a word. Karen was stone still, lips tight, hands clenched. I don't think she truly believed this would happen until that moment. She looked small. Still angry, still dangerous, but small. She didn't take it well. Within a day of the court order, I started receiving complaints, suspicious ones. My trash bins were suddenly being cited as improperly placed. My mailbox was not regulation height. A neighbor reported loud music at 2 a.m., despite the fact I'd been asleep and alone that night. These weren't just random violations. They were surgical, precise, and they all came from the HOA compliance officer, Karen's closest ally, a retired dentist named Marvin who looked like a sentient pocket calculator. So I did what anyone would do. I bought his house too. Not directly, of course. I wasn't made of money. But Marvin had listed his property on a quiet sale site for months, trying to move to Arizona to be near his daughter. I found the listing, contacted his agent under an LLC I owned, and made a competitive cash offer contingent on a 1-week close. It was accepted. He hadn't even connected the dots until I showed up for the inspection and waved. "Surprise," I said. "Your paperwork's in the mail." Marvin moved out in record time. I rented the house to a group of local musicians. Very nice guys, very respectful, but they rehearsed on Tuesday nights. Loudly. I made sure they were always finished by 10, within local noise limits, but just loud enough that Karen could hear the bass lines through her triple-glazed windows. If she filed a complaint? Not her jurisdiction anymore. Marvin was gone. And remember those board members who stepped down? Their replacements had already voted to suspend the HOA's enforcement power until a third-party review of bylaws could be completed. The HOA was effectively neutered. But still, Karen refused to vacate her house. Legally, she couldn't stop the sale. But emotionally? She was dug in like a tick on a deer. She filed appeals, sent threatening letters, accused me of harassment to anyone who would listen. But none of it stuck. And after weeks of stalling, with the court-imposed deadline approaching, she finally relented. She found a buyer, an out-of-state couple who fell in love with the landscaping and had no idea what kind of bile-soaked history was fertilizing the roses. The sale closed on a Thursday. That Friday morning, the demolition crew arrived. See, during the partition case, I'd negotiated with the court to have first right of purchase on the property. Meaning, if she couldn't find a buyer I approved, I could match any offer. So when her buyers backed out last minute, something about undisclosed mold, can't imagine how they found out, I swooped in, matched the price, and closed. Now I owned her house. The whole thing. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It wasn't even about the porch. It was about principle. Karen had turned this quiet little neighborhood into her personal fiefdom. She ruled through intimidation and technicality. And when someone finally played by her rules better than she did, she couldn't handle it. I didn't just want her gone. I wanted her legacy erased. So the backhoe swung. The siding cracked. And Karen, standing across the street with a for sale sign leaning against her Prius, watched the walls of her empire fall like wet cardboard. She stood there in a wrinkled blouse and yoga pants, frozen on the sidewalk, while her life's masterpiece buckled under the weight of a rented excavator. I never said a word to her. Just watched from my lawn chair, sipping cold brew coffee like it was a front-row seat at a theater production. Because it was. Karen had built her entire identity around that house, and now she couldn't stop the inevitable, because she no longer owned a single brick of it. I did. Legally. Permanently. With zero HOA oversight, since the property no longer sat under HOA jurisdiction the moment it was sold and reclassified under my development LLC. She eventually turned and walked away, slow and stiff like each step took effort not to crumple. I didn't gloat. I didn't wave. That would have been too easy. Too emotional. Instead, I turned my chair slightly to the right, set down my coffee, and opened a folder filled with architectural blueprints. Because demolishing Karen's house was never the end. It was the start of something much bigger. You see, I hadn't bought her house just to flatten it. I'd bought it because of where it sat, on a slight hill with an unrestricted view across the neighborhood. Once the dust settled, I began working. Fast. I submitted a request to the city for a minor zoning variance to convert the residential lot into a mixed-use development. The city had been looking for ways to modernize older suburban areas, especially those with outdated HOA restrictions that stifled new growth. My proposal? A sleek, two-story corner café with co-working space on top. A spot where locals could gather, get out of their cookie-cutter homes, and actually interact like human beings instead of filing petty complaints about lawn edging. The permit process took a month. I hosted a community Q&A session in the local library to explain my plans. Karen showed up, of course she did, and tried to sabotage the meeting by handing out leaflets titled, "Stop the Corporate Invasion." But they were printed in Comic Sans and riddled with typos, and midway through the meeting, one of the elderly residents asked, "Karen, didn't you used to fine me for having garden gnomes? Why are you suddenly against structure?" The room chuckled. Karen turned purple and left. Support for the café grew fast, helped in part by the fact that I'd committed to hiring locally and giving HOA residents a discount. Plus, the lot had sat empty for weeks now, and people were tired of looking at orange fencing and exposed dirt. My architect finalized the renderings. My contractor broke ground. Construction began. Karen, meanwhile, flailed. She filed complaints to the city. She tried to have my zoning variance overturned. She even tried to rejoin the HOA board, which now had a more moderate president who smiled politely and then blocked her number. Desperate, she turned to social media, starting a Facebook page called Save Oak Ridge from Outsiders. It got 12 likes. One of them was her dog's account. I should have felt bad. But I didn't. Not because I wanted to ruin her life. I just wanted to prove a point. That power built on control and fear collapses the moment someone pushes back with facts, patience, and a better lawyer. Karen had pushed and pushed, and now she was living in a rental half a mile away, watching from the sidelines as her kingdom turned into something useful, modern, and, worst of all, popular. But this wasn't the twist. That came one morning when I received a call from my lawyer. "You're going to want to sit down," he said. "Karen just filed a civil suit." I laughed. "For what?" "Emotional distress because I made her property valuable." "No," he replied. "She's claiming you targeted her specifically, and that the demolition of her house was malicious. She's calling it neighborhood sabotage." I actually choked on my coffee. Her lawsuit wasn't well written, and most of the claims were so vague a toddler could have argued them down, but she'd attached dozens of exhibits. Photos of me drinking coffee during demolition, emails she'd printed from the HOA thread, ones where I'd used phrases like, "Karen's little castle," and "if she wants a war, she'll get one." Out of context, they made me look like a cartoon villain. In reality, They were sarcastic replies in chain emails after weeks of her fining me for mailbox positioning. Still, the case wasn't laughable. It had just enough surface-level drama to warrant attention. My lawyer wasn't worried, but he advised we treat it seriously. I countersued for defamation, harassment, and abuse of HOA power, attaching a timeline that outlined her years of fines, her deliberate targeting of my property, and her continued attempts to undermine lawful transactions. The court consolidated the cases and set a trial date. Karen had finally done what she always threatened to do, made it personal and public. In the weeks leading up to the hearing, I got calls. Some neighbors worried this drama would tank property values. Others wanted to testify. A few just offered to mow my lawn in solidarity. I prepared my strategy carefully, not just with my lawyer but with a PR consultant I hired from a friend's media company. We made a quiet video interview about neighborhood growth and released it to a local podcast that covered suburban development stories. It wasn't flashy, just honest. I told my story without mocking her, without exaggeration, just facts. The video gained traction. People started seeing through the hysteria. Then, 2 days before the trial, another twist landed on my doorstep in a plain manila envelope. Karen was being investigated by the state bar for unauthorized legal advice. Apparently, during her time as HOA president, she'd issued legal opinions on behalf of the board, without ever having a license to practice law. She'd even drafted her own cease and desist letters to residents, some of which bordered on legal threats. One of the board's former secretaries had filed a complaint with evidence, and now the state was looking into it. If she was found to have impersonated legal authority, even casually, it could result in serious fines, or worse. She didn't show up to court. Her lawyer stood alone, flustered, and requested a delay due to her medical emergency. The judge granted a 30-day extension but seemed annoyed. During the interim, more people came forward with stories. Some about Karen stalking them, others about her threatening fines for invisible violations. Someone even found a screenshot of her bragging online about shaking down a teenager for installing a basketball hoop without permission. Her reputation collapsed like a bad roof in a windstorm. 30 days later, when the trial finally resumed, the court dismissed her civil case as meritless. Mine went forward. The judge allowed my claim for HOA harassment and awarded me compensatory damages for the legal costs I'd incurred as a result of her actions. Karen lost. Publicly. Officially. Permanently. And just like that, she disappeared. Moved out of her rental. Deleted her Facebook group. Vanished from community life like she'd never existed. People stopped talking about her like a neighbor and started talking about her like a bad dream. The café? Opened right on time. I named it Porch. Because sometimes, poetic justice tastes best with espresso and sunlight. Opening day was bright, breezy, and buzzing in a way Karen's little regime could never have imagined. Porch. Yes, that's what I named the café, because if I was going to be fined into oblivion over a few square feet of wood and nails, then I was going to immortalize that absurdity with a smile and good coffee. Had lines out the door by 9 a.m. parents with strollers, freelancers with laptops, teens skipping morning classes, old couples gossiping about their neighbors. It felt like the entire neighborhood showed up just to spite what used to stand on that hill. The patio seating wrapped around where her manicured roses once grew, and I'll admit, I might have placed the chairs just a few inches closer to the sidewalk than necessary, because if Karen was still watching from a distance, I wanted her to see people laughing where her "No loitering" sign once hung. The first week was chaos in the best way. Porch took off like a rocket. We made the local paper, then a regional food blog picked us up, then someone posted a TikTok that went semi-viral, captioned, "HOA Queen got dethroned and replaced with cold brew." Views exploded. Comments flooded in. People asked for a full story. And for once, I gave it to them. But the real twist? Karen didn't stay gone. 3 weeks after Porch opened, I saw her. Not on my property. Not at a zoning meeting. She was sitting in her beat-up Prius, parked 2 blocks away, just far enough to avoid suspicion, just close enough to watch. It was dusk. The lights inside the café were warm. We had a guitarist playing on the patio. Kids chased each other between tables. Karen sat still. No clipboard. No expression. Just her pale face barely visible behind the reflection of her own dashboard. I didn't wave. I didn't approach. I just looked at her, the way you'd look at a museum exhibit that used to be dangerous but now was just history. I thought maybe that would be the end. But I should have known better. A week later, I got a visit from a city inspector. Friendly guy. Young. Seemed embarrassed to be there. Someone filed a complaint, he told me, glancing at his tablet. Claimed your outdoor seating violates pedestrian easement laws. I nodded. Someone with a clipboard, perhaps? He laughed under his breath. We get these from time to time. Anonymous tip line. Looks like a recycled IP address too. Same one flagged a bunch of other businesses for fake violations across town last year. I asked if I needed to do anything. Nope, he said, shaking his head. You're good. Everything's compliant. Just figured I'd give you a heads up. Seems like someone's got a grudge. I didn't flinch. I just made a note. Then I filed a public record request on the city's complaint log. I didn't need the name. Just the timing. And surprise, each complaint lined up with the café's major milestones. Opening day. First podcast feature. Local magazine article. Every high was matched with her little passive-aggressive attempt to drag us down. So I made a decision. It was time to end this for good. I started with her rental. It was a bland 2-bedroom duplex about 6 blocks away, managed by a private company that specialized in high-turnover properties. I requested a meeting with the property owner, not the manager, but the actual owner. His name was Leonard. He was in his 70s, retired, and tired of the headache. He'd never met Karen. All he knew was that she paid rent on time and submitted constant maintenance requests. He said she once filed an emergency ticket because the water pressure dropped for 2 hours. It's always something, he sighed. Honestly, I'm thinking about selling. That was all I needed to hear. We struck a deal. Fast. Clean. I didn't overpay. I didn't undercut. I made it easy. He was thrilled. And now, once again, I owned her house. Well, her rental this time. But the feeling was eerily familiar. I let her stay. For 2 weeks. Then I sent the legal notice. Not eviction. Just a non-renewal. Her lease was month to month. I gave her 30 days, as required by law, and offered to waive her final rent if she moved out early. She didn't respond. But I know she got it. The certified mail receipt came back signed in shaky handwriting. The neighbors said she left in the middle of the night, dragging boxes into a rental truck by herself. No goodbye. No clipboard. No flair. I expected that to be the final nail. But the true ending came after. A month later, Porch was thriving. We expanded hours, hired more staff, added a weekend brunch menu that sold out every Saturday. The community was alive in a way it hadn't been in years. Then, out of nowhere, I got a manila envelope in my mailbox. No return address. Just my name written in shaky cursive. Inside was a letter. No threats. No accusations. Just 3 words. You were right. That was it. No signature. No context. Just the last whisper from a paper tyrant whose empire had rotted from the inside out. For a moment I felt something unexpected. Not triumph. Not satisfaction. Something close to pity. Because Karen had never really been in charge of anything. Not the neighborhood. Not the HOA. Not even herself. Her entire identity was a performance, a role she clung to because she didn't know how to be a person without power. She didn't need an enemy. She needed purpose. And when the purpose collapsed, she had nothing left. I never told anyone about the letter. Some things don't need to be shared. Some victories are quiet, private, and a little bit sad. Instead, I focus forward. 3 months after that letter, Porch was named Best Community Spot in a regional magazine. We added a rooftop garden, started a scholarship fund for local students interested in urban planning. I even stepped in to help restructure the HOA, turning it from a fear-based bureaucracy into a volunteer council with real transparency and zero fines. The first official meeting under the new structure was held at Porch. I gave a short speech. Nothing dramatic. Just a thank you to everyone who'd stood up for change, who'd believed in rebuilding something better instead of clinging to the wreckage of a rotten system. Afterward, one of the former board members approached me. "You know," he said, "I always thought she had something on you. The way she went after you, obsessively, I figured maybe you guys had history." I shook my head. "No history. Just one bad decision about a porch." He laughed. "Well, it's the best thing that ever happened to this neighborhood." Maybe it was. All I know is, sometimes the war you don't want becomes the opportunity you never expected. And sometimes the best revenge isn't a takedown. It's a rebuild. The first snow came early that year, soft and quiet like the neighborhood had finally exhaled after holding its breath for too long. Porch looked beautiful under a light dusting, string lights glowing on the patio, people wrapped in scarves sipping hot cider under heat lamps, and the rooftop garden asleep under burlap wraps and careful insulation. It was peaceful in a way I hadn't experienced since moving into Oak Ridge Estates, back before I knew what HOA stood for, back before Karen stood on my porch like she'd personally invented property law. I'd won. That much was clear. But the funny thing about winning a war is that once the noise dies down, you're left standing in the silence wondering what to do with all the space that victory leaves behind. I wasn't idle. Porch became a hub, community classes on weekend mornings, book swaps every second Thursday, even a Tuesday night chess club that got surprisingly competitive. The HOA transformation went smoother than expected. We held elections for new volunteer positions, rewrote the bylaws in plain English, and stripped the enforcement mechanisms back to essentials: safety, sanitation, and structural integrity. Fines were replaced with warning notices and friendly mediation. Most importantly, we implemented term limits. No more Karen dynasties. Despite the cold, the neighborhood felt warmer. People stopped locking themselves behind curtains and started talking to one another. Kids played outside. Gardens grew with character instead of conformity. People still disagreed, but now they did it face to face, over coffee or cider, not through anonymous complaint forms and whispered threat. But Karen never reappeared. I thought maybe she'd pop up again once the dust truly settled. I even expected some dramatic final act, her storming into a board meeting, demanding to be heard, slapping down some new lawsuit she'd been cooking up like a turkey left in the oven too long. But nothing. No more complaints. No sightings. Just silence. I found myself wondering where she went, what she was doing, whether she regretted anything, or if she'd simply rewritten the narrative in her head until she was the misunderstood heroine of a neighborhood gone rogue. People like her don't typically change. They just relocate their tyranny. Then, one day in late February, I got a phone call. Not a local number. Out-of-state area code. I almost ignored it, assuming it was spam. But something told me to answer. "Is this Porch?" the voice asked, hesitant, female, tired. "Yes," I said, cautious. "How can I help?" "This is going to sound strange," she said, and then paused. "My name's Jill. I'm Karen's sister." That woke me up. She explained that Karen had been living with her in Indiana for the past 2 months. That after everything went south, Karen hit a wall. No money, no job, no allies. She'd sold off most of her things. Tried staying in a motel for a while. Got sick. Finally called Jill, whom she hadn't spoken to in years. Jill took her in. "I'm not calling to ask for anything," she said. "She doesn't know I'm reaching out. I saw what you did. I read the articles. I saw the video on the café's opening. And the thing is, I remember her before all this. Before HOA boards and bylaws and whatever she became. I waited. She's not well, Jill said softly. Mentally. Physically. And she keeps saying the same thing over and over, that it was never supposed to get that bad. That she just wanted to be respected. That the porch made her feel powerless. There it was. The full circle. I thanked her. We ended the call. I sat for a while after, just staring out the café window at a group of kids building a snow fort. And I felt not guilt, not pity, but something more complicated. An ache that came from seeing how far a person can fall when they mistake control for connection. A week later, I sent a letter. Not to Karen, she didn't want to hear from me. But to Jill. I included a small gift card to Porch, and a handwritten note that read, I hope someday she visits. We saved a seat. I didn't expect a reply. But I got one, a few weeks later, in Jill's neat handwriting. She smiled when she saw it. That's the first time I've seen her smile in months. Thank you. That was it. That's where it ended. Quiet. Peaceful. Not with a bang, not with a court ruling or another power play, but with something that felt a little like grace. As spring came, the neighborhood bloomed in ways Karen's reign never allowed. Yards became colorful, messy, unique. Someone planted a sunflower patch next to the sidewalk. Another family built a small greenhouse out of old windows. People used their porches again. Real porches, the kind meant for sitting and waving and talking. Porch the café expanded. We bought the lot next door and added a bakery. Local high schoolers started working weekend shift. We added a community chalkboard where people could post announcements, share quotes, or draw whatever came to mind. One morning someone drew a cartoon of a house with a cape flying off its roof, with the caption, HOA no more. I didn't erase it. Every so often, people still ask about the story. Newcomers hear bits and pieces. I don't always give them the full saga. Sometimes I just say, long story. Started with a porch. Ended with a café. If they press, I'll tell them about the clipboard, or the fines, or the absurdity of being legally attacked over architecture. But I try not to lean into the revenge. That wasn't the point. Not really. The point was that I stood up. The point was that the community stood with me. The point was that we proved something. To ourselves, to each other, even to Karen. That fear only works when you stay silent. That entitlement doesn't make someone untouchable. That if you keep your cool, do your homework, and hold your ground, you can tear down a bad system, and build something beautiful in its place. Now, when I walk through the neighborhood, people wave. They talk. They live. And when I sit on my front porch, which, by the way, is still standing and now fully approved, I sometimes think back to that first day. The clipboard. The fine. The smug smile. The spark that lit a fire that burned down more than just a house. It burned down a lie. And in its place, we built something real. So yeah, Karen fined me for my front porch. So I bought her house and demolished it. But that's not the headline anymore. The real story is this. Karen built walls. I built doors. And now, everyone's invited in.